Since we filmed this video, the story's actually changed. The resolution that I mentioned in the video today has failed already. Boo-hoo. I'm not really sad about it, honestly. The resolution has changed, and normally, in the world of politics, when there is a changing news story, as happens very frequently, we would either just ignore the story, or we'd change it, or re-record it. In this case, though, I think we explain pretty well in the video you're about to see some of the reasons why that proposed resolution was brought to the floor of the Wyoming Senate, and so therefore we're just going to play it in its entirety. Just remember, politicians often have very wealthy, very influential people paying them to do dumb stuff on the floor of the Senate. Enjoy. You wouldn't believe how many people have reached out to me in the last few days to tell me, sometimes with glee, sometimes with concern, that Wyoming is about to ban the sale of all new electric vehicles by 2035. Don't worry, it's not going to happen, but I'm going to tell you all about it in a second. To paraphrase the lovely Anton He of Science and Space, hello wonderful people. I'm making this video in my truck today for reasons that will become apparent later in the video. I'm running an errand and making a video at the same time, but there's a real reason why I'm in the truck rather than in the studio. You see, late last week, Wyoming Senator Anderson decided that he was going to introduce a resolution to the Wyoming Senate that basically called for all new electric vehicles to be banned from sale within the state by 2035. Now, to be clear, there are a couple of senators called Senator Anderson in the state of Wyoming. One of them is now retired. The one I'm talking about is, of course, the one who is still currently in office and will be in office until 2025, if memory serves correctly. Now, for those who don't know, Wyoming's not a particularly populous state, and I'll come to those figures a little later in the video, but while a lot of headlines have said this is effectively an attempted ban on electric vehicles within the state, a chance to own the Libs, the reality is slightly different. While it was introduced to the Senate in the state of Wyoming, it's a resolution, not a bill. And the very important thing about a resolution versus a bill is designed to be something that will ultimately become law. A bill is an attempt to write a new piece of legislation that will be followed at whatever legislative level it was introduced at. Now, obviously, if this was a Wyoming bill, it would become a law in the state of Wyoming if passed. In this case, though, it's a resolution, which is effectively a legislative's way of saying, tusk, tusk, we don't approve of this, and we are very, very upset. In this case, this is basically a knee-jerk reaction to the state of California and other US states that are following CARB legislation and deciding that they are going to ban the sale of all new internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035, instead asking citizens to buy brand new electric vehicles instead. And a hint at that for this Wyoming resolution is that the resolution was going to be passed and then a copy sent to the President of the United States of America, obviously President Joe Biden, and also the text of the resolution calls for a copy of the resolution to be sent to California Governor Newsom. This is effectively just a bit of tongue wagging and finger wagging and we're not happy with the thing that you want to do for the state of the planet. And there's a reason why Wyoming is very upset with this and is, as lots of news companies on the right side of the political spectrum are calling it, a war on wokeism. At the moment, the oil and gas industry in Wyoming is expecting a bit of a resurgence in demand. There was a noticeable drop in oil and gas demand during the COVID pandemic, and the state hopes that it's going to see an increase in demand in the next 2 years. Right now, estimates place that at about 90 million barrels of oil per year pumped out of oil fields in Wyoming. That is the equivalent of 7.2 billion US dollars in oil. According to my research, the GDP of Wyoming is about 41.6 billion US dollars per year. So if we take today's oil price, that equates to about 17% of Wyoming's total GDP comes from the oil and gas industry. That's not a small figure. And if we drill down a little bit further, no pun intended, we'll see that Wyoming produces about 2.2% of all of the oil consumed in America today. It also produces 44.4% of the nation's coal. That's according to the EIA, the US government energy information agency. It's kind of like a statistics arm for the US government. Wyoming produces about 2.2% of all of the oil produced in the US, and it's also responsible for 41.4% of all of the coal that is mined in the US. So Wyoming relies very heavily on the fossil fuel industry for a lot of its pennies, that and farming, but you can see the energy sector is big business in Wyoming. Those figures, I hope, go some way to explaining why Senator Anderson is so keen to react to other states, quote unquote, banning our vehicles. But it's not just oil and gas production or even coal production that has got this particular senator upset. And remember, politicians are always paid for by large donations made to their campaign funds by, you've guessed it, the big businesses in their state. And you can bet a hefty sum of money that the oil and gas industry has put substantial dollars into his campaigns in the past. This truck, the F-150 Lightning Lariat Extended Range Edition, has a equivalent fuel economy of 70 miles per gallon equivalent. That is versus the next most efficient Ford F-150 that you can buy today. That is obviously the F-150 Hybrid, which gets a combined fuel economy of 25 miles per gallon. You can tell there's a big difference between 25 and 70. In fact, this is almost 3 times as efficient using the energy that it has on board when compared to the F-150 Hybrid. In case you didn't know, 1 gallon of gasoline is approximately the equivalent of 33.7 kilowatt hours of electricity. And so I've done some calculations using the fuel economy figures for the F-150 Hybrid and the F-150 Lightning. If you take into consideration just the emissions from burning the amount of energy used to propel the vehicle along, a gas F-150 Hybrid has an emission of about 366 grams of CO2 equivalent per mile. CO2 equivalent includes all of these other emissions that come out of the tailpipe at the same time, whereas the Lightning has the equivalent of 207 grams of CO2 equivalent per mile driven, and that is assuming a standard US grid mix today of all of the different types of energy generation combined using that average mix. Now, you can see that the electric version is, from an emissions point of view, far better. From an efficiency point of view, it's far better. But I should point out that those figures don't take into consideration the fact that if you are refining gasoline from the ground and then bringing it to a refinery, and then you are then delivering it to a petrol station or a gas station, you're responsible for every gallon of gasoline that is actually at the pump. There's between, I think it was something like 3 and 8 pounds of extra CO2 equivalent emissions just to get it to the pump. So that's what, 1.5 to 4 kilograms of CO2, which is quite a bit, and I didn't take that into consideration for those figures there. And if I did, it would inch the gas up to about 400 grams of CO2 per mile, and I'm just doing that calculation off the top of my head, so don't tell me I'm wrong, because I probably am, and I know I am. Anyway, that's what this is all about. So in summary, Senator Anderson, State Senator Anderson, is not trying to ban the sale of new electric vehicles, although I'm sure he probably would like to do that. He did say on Fox News earlier this week that he doesn't have a problem with electric vehicles and some of his friends and family drive EVs, which came across in a very kind of, I don't have a problem with gay people, some of my friends are gay kind of way, which made me smile to myself. But at the end of the day, this is all about wanting to say how very strongly the state of Wyoming is upset with the state of California, with the US federal government, and all of the other states and government agencies who are trying to push for cleaner, greener, safer, and smarter transportation. And here is me driving what is, unfortunately, one of the most inefficient electric vehicles you can buy today. On a good day, I can get maybe 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour, which is terrible, by the way. And yet this is still nearly 3 times as efficient when it comes to its energy use as the gasoline version. And I'm sure if I did a proper well-to-wheel analysis for this vehicle and assumed a life of about 200,000 to 300,000 miles, this would come out tops. I know it would. I've seen the maths for other vehicles of similar efficiencies in the past. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video. Thanks for joining me in the drive. And let me know in the comments below if you like this particular style of video. Would you like me to do more drive and chat? Or do you prefer things that are a little bit more heavily scripted? Let us know below. And on that note, we are of course done with today's video. I'm reading this off my telephone in case you didn't know. So if I look down, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just making sure that I get all the names right. If you do want more from the channel, hit subscribe, the bell, and follow the links below to support us with a YouTube membership or indeed a Patreon subscription. You'll also find links to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin, and swag store, and check us out on Mastodon as well. Scrolling on my right is my list of amazing charged up supporters, and shout outs go out to our self-driving tier supporters: Mike Weeder, Linda Irish, Sean Tucker, Patrick Boyarski, Paul Nelson, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Michael Goad, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Pedro Mua Pinheiro, Brophy Wolf, Chris and Michael Johnson, Tazla in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C, Stephen O'Donoghue, Carl Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Ray Jean Fellows, Denny Hyde, Chris Ascenta, and Jim Benness. Finally, out of this world thanks to our Starman level supporters. They are Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, JP Fagerback, Joe Bresney, John Lyons, Rory Litwin, Kevin Barrowbridge, Dave Kitchen, Aaron Hahn, Laura Reynolds, Marcel Ward, Matthew Drobnak, Paul Conway, Reggie Watts, Will Graylin, and of course, Ian. I'll be back soon with more great content, as will the rest of the team, but until then, keep evolving!